Hello and welcome to the Calmcast, a time to feel calm and think clearly. I'm Claire Downham, the Queen of Calm, a transformational life coach. I was a burnt out head teacher who finally made the journey to calm after years of trying, and I want to prevent you from having to do the same. The Calmcast is a series of short explorations, gently guiding you back to your natural state, which is calm and clarity. Just listen like you would listen to music, with an open mind and curiosity. There's nothing else to do. Now let's relax into today's episode. So today I'm asking the question, is knowledge really power? And it was apparently Francis Bacon who first spoke about this. And what he was pointing to was kind of in terms of scientific knowledge and things like that, that is really powerful. And I guess in that regard, I'm pointing in exactly the same direction. When we think about the great scientific discoveries of time, there are some things that really stand out that change the world once we knew them, once we had the knowledge, once we found things that were true all the time, because that's what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about universal truths. So, there's lots of examples. There's things like the principles of flight, that the reason why there's a little bit of an argy-bargy about who first managed to fly, between the Wright brothers and I don't know who else, but there was more than one group of people all over the world who at a very similar time achieved flight. It's because they discovered the principles of flight. There are certain things you need to understand in order to have a vehicle. Is a plane a vehicle anyway? To have an aeroplane get off the ground successfully. And once human beings had that knowledge as a bedrock, of course, we can now fly something the size of a small house in the sky, which is just amazing, isn't it, when you think about it? And that's because the principles of flight apply no matter what size of the aeroplane is. The principles of flight are the same. I think they're thrust, drag, lift, and gravity, possibly. But do correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not overly bothered about knowing the principles of flight as it happens, but they do exist as a fact. There are some principles behind the ability that human beings now have to fly. And other things that were super helpful and, are still things that we base our existence on are things like the fact that the Earth is a sphere and isn't flat. That changed everything about how we navigate around the world, about, why ships had those crow's nests, the old sailing ships, they had crow's nests, and that was to just make sure we weren't going to fall off the edge of the world. So there's lots of things that human beings needed to do when they didn't have the principles of something, when they didn't have the facts about it. Now, human psychology is the same, really. Human psychology, really, I tend to think, and I once said this to a psychology student, and she agreed. I said it's the study of why people feel the way they feel and how to make them feel better. Now, that question, why do people feel the way they feel? Goodness gracious, has that had a lot of answers over the years? And it's a bit like, there were, all those people who tried to fly airplanes. You can watch the comical videos on YouTube of them, flapping their arms with wings on and going up ramps and just falling off the other side. I kind of, when I'm watching those videos, hope that nobody was injured in the making of the videos. I suspect they were, though, I'm afraid. But until you have the principles of something, that's kind of how it is. It's all a bit haphazard. This might work for a few seconds in terms of flight, and then it doesn't. It goes flop because the principles aren't there. And our human psychology is very much the same. When you are seeking to feel better, there's a lot of things to try, isn't there, on the way? And that's because the initial question, why do we feel the way we feel, seems to have a myriad of different answers to it, depending on our circumstances, whether we've experienced trauma, whether we think we've got some mental illness that somebody may be telling us is a chemical imbalance, all sorts of things can look like the source of our feelings. So there's no principle there. None at all. There's no principle at all. It's a bit like, the game where the heads bob up. I think it's called whack-a-mole, and you have to bang them down with a hammer. It's just like that. Well, let's just keep hitting with a hammer, and eventually we'll find something that helps this person. And I would say, actually, and this is probably the first time I've said it like this, is that's why medication just seems like the thing to do. Because if you were a doctor trying to help somebody with a mental illness, where do you start? Where do you start with all the different things you could give people? So there's a very few things that, lines that the NHS will go down, basically counselling, CBT and medication. That's it. Those are varying in their helpfulness because they're not principle-based either. So knowledge is really powerful when it comes to our human psychology. And another great example of this in terms of principles, and another great metaphor or analogy, I never know which is which, to be fair, that when a human child begins to be able to grasp things, a human child doesn't understand the principle of gravity. So gravity is another principle that changed the world. Once Newton had the apple fall on his head, and once people understood gravity, that was a precursor to the principles of flight. We couldn't have done the flight thing without understanding the gravity thing. So once we understood gravity, that changed the world phenomenally. But little children aren't born knowing about gravity. And that's why they're throwing drop things all the time. Not because they're being naughty, but because they're being scientists. They don't know they're being scientists. But, a child needs to test out, do all things fall? Forks, food, pencils, scissors, all these things. And do things fall the same in every room? And do they fall outside? And, so every situation, the child is testing this hypothesis. Do things fall? Do things fall? Unconsciously, of course. It's all unconscious learning. And by the time the child kind of reaches primary age, they've got it. They know. They don't know it's called gravity, probably, but they do know that everything falls down. Not up. Nothing ever floats. Nothing ever falls up. Everything always falls down. And so that principle then defines how the child growing up, works. And it means that when I pick up my mug, I know to put my mug on the table, not to drop it there, or not to just let go of it over the floor, because I know it'll fall and the tea will spill, or my mug will break, and that won't be particularly helpful. Now, when we think about our human psychology, there are some principles now, since 1973, nearly 50 years now, there now are some principles of psychology. And those principles are that as a human being, you think. And you are alive. There is an aliveness and energy running through you, like is running through everything else. And that you are conscious, that you are an awareness. And that's the closest really to who you really are. And off the back of that, there are some things that we can see. That this question, where do my feelings come from, where the knowledge is really powerful, is that there's one answer to that question. One answer. Can you imagine if everybody knew there was one answer to where do my feelings? How much quieter would your head be if there was only ever one answer to where are my feelings coming from? And your feelings are an indicator of your state of mind. Nothing else. Nothing else. Only 100% of the time, your feelings are an indicator of your state of mind. There is literally no other explanation for a feeling. That's all it is. Now, how that knowledge is really powerful is that when you then experience a feeling, you know some things that are useful. Oh, I've got, and this is not how it goes. It kind of becomes unconscious, but intellectually, I have an awful feeling. Let's say I feel angry. This means I've got angry thinking. From that point of knowledge, the power that we have then is to do nothing. Invariably, I find that nothing is the thing to do. Nothing. Because if I act from this dodgy feeling, underpinning that is unhelpful thinking, then my behaviour has to be from the unhelpful thinking. The only thinking I've got is unhelpful thinking, so the behaviour that I do is going to be unhelpful. Like, if I'm feeling angry, if I think that feeling is coming from outside of me, it will make sense to shout at the person or tell them off or whatever, have a rant or something. When I realise that the feeling is coming from me, that it's thought in the moment and nothing else, then it does not make sense to act. It makes sense to focus on me, to focus on my well-being, to focus on what works for me in the moment, not to calm myself down, but just allow myself to calm. And that is really, really, really powerful. And that's where knowledge is power. Really, really powerful. And it's principles. So, knowing this is just can become part of your entire life. It is part of your entire life. There's no two ways about that. It is going to be part of your life forever, really, and it's going to be powerful to you in every single aspect of your life. So please remain open to that is what I would ask of you. Lots of love and take care. Thank you so much for listening. There's nothing to do now but bring some awareness to how this is working out in your life. Listen regularly to experience longer and longer periods of calm. This has been the Calmcast with Claire Downham, Queen of Calm. Take care and keep listening.